the numbers, but gratefully received.
You can imagine between 500 and 600 men, women, and children, worn down by drawing handcarts through snow and mud, fainting by the wayside, falling, chilled by the cold. We have prayed without ceasing, and the blessing of God has been with us. Captain George D. Grant, Greasewood Creek.
The rescuers began again, leading the Martin, Hunt, and Hodgett companies towards Devil's Gate.
November the 2nd. We arrived at Devil's Gate that night to camp in the snow, which was deep and freezing. We found several big fires there and several log huts. John Jakes, Martin Company.
Every room, nook, and corner was taken. Wagons and tents were filled to their utmost capacity. Harvey Clough, Rescue.
Ahead on the trail, the Willie Company pushed on to the valley. They left all but a few of their handcarts at Fort Bridger.
November 2nd. We found a great many teams at Fort Bridger that had come to our help. All our company rode. This day I also rode for the first time on our journey. John Chislett, Willie Company.
The final days of the Willie Company's journey continued to be marked by death and cold.
Peter Madsen from Copenhagen, age 66 years, died during the day. The snowstorm came on this evening. Willie Company Journal.
In a letter to Brigham Young, carried by 2 express riders, Captain Grant reported the last handcart and wagon companies had been found. November 3rd. The rescuers and leaders from the Martin, Hunt, and Hodgett companies met to determine whether to winter at Devil's Gate or try to reach the valley. With supplies insufficient, the leaders decided to press on to Salt Lake, leaving many of the handcarts and the freight from the Hunt and Hodgett wagons as well.
A unanimous vote was taken that all would be willing to do as they were instructed, even if it was required of them to leave all they had behind and be glad to get into the valley with their lives only. Hunt Company Journal, Devil's Gate.
Our company is too small to help much. It is only a drop to a bucket in comparison to what is needed. I think that not over 1/3 of Brother Martin's company is able to walk. We will move every day toward the valley, if we shovel snow to do it, the Lord helping us. Captain George D. Grant, Devil's Gate.
November 4th. The emigrants and rescuers began to move to a nearby cove for shelter. But first they had to cross the Sweetwater.
For many, it was a frightening experience, the thought of going into the water. They recalled vividly in their mind what had happened when they'd crossed the Platte about 16 days earlier on the day the storm overtook the company. While there was little bits of ice on the Platte, now there were large chunks in the water.
The crossing of the Sweetwater at this point was the worst river crossing of the expedition, and the last. The ice was 3 or 4 inches thick. Before the crossing was completed, the shades of evening were closing around, the coldest hour of the 24. Or at least it seemed to be so. John Jakes, Martin Company.
The river was only about 2 or 3 feet deep. It's only about 30 feet wide as far as the crow flies. But the ford that they had to take was substantially longer. So they were in the water for a period of time greater than just 30 or 40 feet. For most, they were able to do it on their own. We know names of 5, and there may have been more, that were there to help those who were having trouble getting across on their own. They would carry them across.
ration of flour was reduced to 4 ounces and 2 ounces for children, making £1 a day for the 6 of us. James Blake, Martin Company.
Temperatures dropped by more than 10 degrees below zero. For 5 days they waited it out in a nearby cove, and they buried their dead.
It was so cold that some of the company came near freezing to death. The sufferings of the people were fearful, and nothing but the power of a merciful God kept them from perishing. Elizabeth Horrocks Jackson, Martin Company.
That same period, the Willie Company neared the end of the trail.
It snowed most of the day. The camping ground presented a most dismal appearance as we rolled on to it. Late at night. Willie Company Journal.
November 9th, the Willie Company entered the valley, receiving a somber reception. Settlers opened their home and the members of this 4th Handcart Company. The sun was shining.
Our toilsome journey was hard to endure, but the Lord gave us strength and courage. Susanna Stone, Willie Company.
Back at Devil's Gate, Daniel W. Jones and 19 men were appointed to stay behind and guard the belongings unloaded from the Hunt and Hodgett wagon train. The wagons were now needed to help transport the Martin Company.
There was not money enough on earth to have hired me to stay. But I remembered my assertion that any of us would stay if called upon. I could not back out. Daniel W. Jones, Rescue.
Daniel W. Jones and his men stayed the winter. 5 months, living on very little, resorting to roasting rawhide to stay alive.
Captain George D. Grant wanted the 20 left at Devil's Gate to sleep with one eye open and one leg out of bed, for there were devils, mountaineers and Indians round about here. John Jakes, Martin Company.
November 9th. The weather broke, and the desperate emigrants left the ravine and headed for the valley. The wagons carried the weak and ill. Still, most had to walk.
Nearly all the handcarts had been left behind. James Blake, Martin Company.
The great object now was to save as many of the people as possible. It was a trying time that day, leaving the ravine. One perplexing difficulty was to determine who should ride, for many must still walk. There was considerable crying of women and children, and perhaps a few of the men, whom the wagons could not accommodate with a ride. John Jakes, Martin Company.
November 10th. Just before sunset, seasoned trail rider Ephraim Hanks, riding one horse and leading another laden with buffalo meat, rode toward the train.
The starved forms and haggard countenances of the poor sufferers, as they moved about slowly shivering with cold, to prepare their scanty evening meal, was enough to touch the stoutest heart. Ephraim Hanks, Rescue.
There was no mitigation of the piercing, wintry cold. John Jakes, Martin Company.
Many of the immigrants whose extremities were frozen lost their limbs. Ephraim Hanks, Rescue.
November 12th. At 3 crossings on the Sweetwater, 4 wagons loaded with flour and supplies met the Martin Company.
November 14th. No deaths in Camp